Okay, so yesterday was my first day doing the ASMR Bible reading, and we talked about the parable of the sower. We started with Matthew 13, and then we did Luke 8, which was Matthew's perspective, and then Luke's perspective, and today is going to be Mark's perspective, which is going to be Mark 4 and Mark chapter 5. Same thing, the parable of the sower. So this is chronological order. I go by the Bible recap that is done by Mrs. Tara-Leigh Cobble. I recommend it. I highly recommend it. It's been wonderful. So let's get right into it. Mark chapter 4. The parable of the sower. And he began to teach again by the sea, and such a very large crowd gathered to him, that he got into a boat in the sea and sat down. And the whole crowd was by the sea on the land. And he was teaching them many things in parables, and was saying to them in his teaching, Listen to this. Behold, the sower went out to sow. And it happened that as he was sowing, some seed fell beside the road, and the birds came and ate it up. And other seed fell on the rocky ground, where it did not have much soil. And immediately it sprang up, because it had no depth of soil. And after the sun rose, it was scorched, and because it had no root, it withered away. And other seed fell among the thorns, and the thorns came up and choked it, and it yielded no crop. And other seeds fell into the good soil, and as they grew up and increased, they were yielding a crop, and produced 30, 60, and 100-fold. And he was saying, He who has ears to hear, let him hear. And when he was alone, his followers, along with the 12, began asking him about the parables. And he was saying to them, To you has been given the mystery of the kingdom of God. But to those who are outside, everything comes in parables, so that while seeing they may see and not perceive, and while hearing they may hear and not understand, lest they return and be forgiven. Verse 13. And he said to them, Do you not understand this parable? How will you understand all the parables? The sower sows the word, and these are the ones who are beside the road where the word is sown. And when they hear, immediately Satan comes and takes away the word which has been sown in them. And in a similar way, these are the ones being sown on the rocky places, those who, when hearing the word, immediately receive it with joy, and they have no root in themselves, but are only temporary. Then, when affliction or persecution arises because of the word, immediately they fall away. And others are those being sown among the thorns. These are the ones who have heard the word, but the worries of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desires for everything else enter in and choke the word, and it becomes unfruitful. And those are the ones which were sown in the good soil. They who hear the word and accept it, and are bearing fruit 30, 60, and 100-fold. And he was saying to them, Is a lamp brought to be put under a basket or under a bed, or is it not to be put on the lampstand? For nothing is hidden except to be revealed, nor has anything been secret, but that it would come to light. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. And he was saying to them, Beware what you listen to. By your standard of measure it will be measured to you, and more will be given to you. For whoever has, to him more shall be given, and whoever does not have, even what he has shall be taken away from him. Verse 26. And he was saying, the kingdom of God is like a man who casts seed upon the soil. And he sleeps and rises night and day, and the seed sprouts and grows, how he himself does not know. The soil produces crops by itself, first the blade, then the head, then the mature grain in the head. But when the grain is ripe, he immediately puts in the sickle, because the harvest has come. Verse 30. And he was saying, how shall we compare the kingdom of God? Or by what parable shall we present it? It is like a mustard seed, which when sown upon the soil, though it is smallest of all seeds that are upon the soil, yet when it is sown, it grows up and becomes largest of all the garden plants, and forms large branches so that the birds of the air can nest under its shade. And with many such parables he was speaking the word to them. And as they were able to hear it, and he was not speaking to them without a parable, but he was explaining everything privately to his own disciples. Verse 35. And on that day, when evening came, he said to them, let us go over to the other side. And leaving the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling up. And Jesus himself was in the stern, sleeping on the cushion. And they got him up and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And he woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Silence, be still. And the wind died down, and it became perfectly calm. And he said to them, why are you so cowardly? Do you still have no faith? And they became very afraid, and were saying to one another, who then is this, that even the wind and the sea shall obey him? Chapter 5. Jesus saves a man with many demons. Then they came to the other side of the sea, into the region of the Gerasenes. And when he got out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one was able to bind him any more, even with a chain, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been torn apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Torn apart and the shackles broken. And no one was strong enough to subdue him. And constantly, night and day, among the tombs in the mountains, he was crying out and gnashing himself with stones. Boy, that sounds like somebody who's possessed by a demon. And seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and bowed down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, what do I have to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you, by God, do not torment me. Okay. For he had been saying to him, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. And he was asking him, what is your name? And he said to him, my name is Legion, for we are many. And he began pleading with him earnestly not to send him out of the region. Now there was a large herd of swine feeding nearby on the mountain. And the demons pleading with him, saying, send us into the swine, so that we may enter them. And Jesus gave them permission. And coming out, the unclean spirits entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea, about 2,000 of them, and they were drowned in the sea. And their herdsmen ran away and reported it in the city and in the countryside. And the people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and observed the demon-possessed man sitting down clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had the legion, and they became frightened. And those who had seen it recounted to them how this had happened to the demon-possessed man, and all about the swine. And they began to plead with him to leave their region. And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed was pleading with him that he might accompany him. And he did not let him, but he said to him, "Go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you, and how he had mercy on you." And he went away and began to preach to the Decapolis what great things Jesus had done for him, and everyone was marveling. Verse 21. And when Jesus had crossed over again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, and so Jesus stayed by the seashore. And one of the synagogue officials named Jairus came up, and on seeing him fell at his feet, and pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Please come, that by coming you may lay your hands on her, so that she will be saved and live." And he went off with him, and a large crowd was following him and pressing on him. And a woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years, and had endured much at the hands of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was not helpful at all, but rather had grown worse, after hearing about Jesus, she came up in the crowd behind him and touched his garment. For she was saying, "If I just touch his garments, I will be saved from this." And immediately the flow of her blood was dried up, and she knew within her body that she had been healed of her affliction. And immediately Jesus perceived in himself that the power proceeding from him had gone forth, turned around in the crowd, and was saying, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples were saying to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he was looking around to see the woman who had done this. But the woman, fearing and trembling, aware of what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he came to her, and he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." While he was still speaking, they came from the house of the synagogue official, saying, "Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any more?" But Jesus, overhearing what had been spoken, said to the synagogue official, "Do not be afraid, only believe." And he allowed no one to accompany him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And they came to the house of the synagogue official, and he saw a commotion, and people loudly crying and wailing. And entering in, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and crying? The child has not died, but is asleep." And they began laughing at him. But putting them all out, he took along the child's father and mother and his own companions, and entered the room where the child was. And taking the child by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha cum," which translated means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the little girl stood up and began to walk, for she was 12 years old. And immediately they were completely astounded. And he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this. And he said that some food should be given to her to eat.